So we just learnt about layering in the time domain, and now we're going to apply what we learnt to something that's quite popular, which is kick layering. And this is an area that a lot of people have trouble with simply because of how obviously bad it sounds when you get it wrong. So phasing issues, frequency masking, all that kind of stuff, it's pronounced in the low end. It's a lot worse compared to, say, the mids and the highs. So when layering kicks, you are incorporating time domain layering as well as the heavy use of EQ. And we're also going to add a bit of compression to glue the layers together as well. So compression does come into the picture quite often. Now for this video, you're going to want to download the zipped folder via the link in the description. This folder, which is called M3 for Module 3, contains the samples that we'll be using in accordance with this video and the following video when we layer claps. Now, I've got 3 kicks here which we're going to make. 2 kicks with a kick and a clap layered. So I'm going to play these individually. I'm going to give a quick explanation of what they are, and then we're going to recreate them. So the first one here is a synthesized kick. Now it's important to note what I've done here is synthesized the low end of the kick and laid it with a top sample, which is included in the M3 pack. The next kick is simply 2 samples laid with each other, a low end sample and a top sample. And finally we've got that first kick again, the kick with the synthesized low end laid with a clap. And you can hear that technique done in a lot of modern dance music, a lot of the tracks that are coming out these days. So I'm going to delete all these and we'll start from scratch. So new MIDI track. And what I use to synthesize the low end is a plugin called Big Kick. And this is a kick synthesizer that's incredibly easy to use. I do recommend you check it out. If you don't have Big Kick, that's okay. You can still pick up a lot from this tutorial and the techniques that we're doing, or that I'm showing you. You can also use a plugin like Massive if you feel competent enough to design the kind of sound I'm making here. Or you can use another kick synthesizer like Sonic Academy's Kick plugin. But what I'm going to do to start off with is turn off the sample section up here, so that we've just got the low end. I'm going to make a short MIDI clip for on the floor kick and just play that. So we've got something very basic. It doesn't sound bad, but it's not what I want. I want to turn this attack up in preparation for adding the top sample. Just going to turn that up to full. Going to turn the hold down a little bit. And decay up to give it a bit more length. I'm also going to adjust this deep. Control to give it a bit more weight. I'll leave the curve as it is. Change the start time. The curve. I'm going to leave the note where it is. So it's a very basic low end sound, and technically it's a kick by itself. If you listen to genres like dark techno and that kind of stuff, you may hear those low kicks with hardly any top end and hardly any punch. But we don't want that. So I'm going to group this. And I'm going to add in a sampler. And then I'm going to go into my M3 folder and add in a TP1, which stands for top 1. So now when I play this, you can hear that there's that top kick sample in there, and it doesn't sound too bad, but it's clashing in the low end, which you can clearly hear. But the two sounds work together, and I know that even though I haven't EQ'd it or anything yet. So it's important to focus on sound selection and make sure that the sounds sound like they're going to work together after processing, at least before you dig into all the EQ and compression and so on. So I'm going to EQ out the low end here. And also notch it around here. And straight away you can hear there's a massive difference between if this EQ is turned off and when the low end is actually removed. Muddy, not muddy. Now, next thing I want to do with this top kick is remove the sustain completely. I want it to be a very short sound. And again, massive difference. And finally, I'm going to turn this decay down until I find that sweet spot. If I pull it down too much, you can hear that it loses that initial punch. So I want to keep it just above 100. That sounds good to me. Now, this is a nice kick and it's very easy to make, but I feel like it lacks a bit of power. It lacks the control that most professionally engineered kicks have. So what I'm going to do is add some glue compression here, which I really like. This is one of my favorite plugins in Ableton. I'm going to turn the attack up to let some of the body and transient punch through. I'm going to turn the release down. I'm going to turn the ratio down as well. I don't want it to be an aggressive sort of compression. I'm just going to adjust this threshold as I play. Now you will hear that some of the low end sort of disappears as I add compression. One way to combat this is to move the attack time up. But I quite like that balanced kind of sound. I feel like it's still got enough low end. In fact, it sounds a lot better. It's an improvement when compared to when it had no compression. So that sounds decent to me. I'm going to give it a bit of makeup gain. And there we have it. A very easy to make kick that has a synthesized low end and a top sample laid over the top. So I'm going to rename this to synth kick. And now we move on to our next one, which is a bit more difficult. So I'm going to insert a sampler. And I'm going to choose BT1, which stands for bottom one. We'll just copy this MIDI clip over, mute the synth kick channel and play this. So you can hear that straight away, you know, this has a high end, it has a punch, a transient. And if we're going to add a top kick over the top of this, we need to get rid of that. So that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to process it before we add the second kick. So I'm going to group this in preparation. And the first thing I'm going to do is adjust this attack curve here, because we're going to be using another sample for the very beginning of the kick. That sounds reasonable, and I'm going to pull this attack curve down all the way. We may come back to that and adjust it later, but for now it's sounding okay. And I'm also going to remove the high end. But I am going to leave some of the mids in there. And the reason I do that is because I like the low end, the low sample when layering, to contain most of the body. I feel like having the body come from the high kick is a bad way to do things. It doesn't sound as good, and it's a lot harder to implement. So I like to leave a little bit of the mids and the low end kick just to contribute to that body. So that's sounding good. So we'll minimize that and add in TP2. As you're going to use it in the sampler. Now straight away you can hear that those two samples, they do work. However, the low end completely disappears. And this is because they're phasing, phase cancellation. So if I mute this, you can hear that the low end comes back. So I want to EQ out the lows here. And I'm also going to turn down the sustain pretty much all the way down like I did last time. Turn the filter off, don't know why that's on. Until I find that sweet spot. So I feel like 189 milliseconds is close. I'm going to go back to this curve here and see if I can improve it. Sounds good to me. And finally, I want to add a few things just to adjust it, to give it a bit more power and character. So first things first, I'm going to add saturation, which I don't normally do, but I feel like in this case it will work well. Just gives it a bit more bite. And I'm going to add glue compression again. In fact, what I'm going to do is copy that glue compressor over and adjust the settings as needed. Sounds good to me. And finally, I want to add some very slight EQ, a little bit of a boost on the low end here, and a notch around here, and also in the mids. Just cleans it up a bit, makes it sound a bit more tight. So that's the second kick. That is layering a low end sample with a high end sample. Again, a bit more difficult than if you were to lay a top end with a synthesized kick, mainly because you have to process this initial kick, the low end kick, and EQ out the lows and etc. So a little bit more difficult, but if you're not used to using a kick synthesizer, it's a great way to create your own original kick. Now what I want to do is show you how you can layer a clap with a synth kick. With any kick, in fact, but I'm going to be doing it with this initial kick here, the synthesized low end kick. So play this again so you can recall how it sounds. What we're going to do is add a clap to this. So I'm going to duplicate TP1 in the group down here, just to save time. And I'm going to add in CL1 to that. Oops. Now if I play this, you'll hear that it doesn't sound like a clap at all. It's very short. In fact, it makes it sound a lot worse. So what we're going to do is turn the sustain all the way up. Turn the volume down a little bit. And adjust this EQ so it doesn't clash. You can hear that it's actually clashing around 1K if I boost this. Just going to pull it down a notch there. And that's not sounding too bad, but I want it to sound a bit more atmospheric. So I'm going to add some reverb to this in the high end. That sounds good to me. And also add a bit of compression, but I'm actually going to be sidechaining this. So what I like to do, because the clap has a transient as well as a top kick, they normally clash and they don't sound too good. You get a bit too much punch. So what I do is I sidechain the clap to the top kick. So I'm going to choose synth kick, which is the second one here, and go down to TP1 post effects. Now, why do I sidechain it to the top instead of the synthesized low end? The reason I do that is because it allows you to have more control over the sidechain parameters. So the top kick is a very short sample. If I solo it, it's pretty much just a click, okay? So when the compressor takes that signal, it's a very short signal, which means that we have a lot more control over the attack and release compared to if we were to use a very long signal like this. So I hope that makes sense. So I use that short top kick sample, and I'm just going to pull this threshold down. Sorry, I'm going to pull the attack down so the transients don't clash. Then I'm going to pull this threshold down until I find a satisfactory point. And that sounds quite good to me. If you go too far, it just sounds a bit unnatural. So that's that. That's how you layer a clap with a kick. So in conclusion, layering kicks, requires practice, mainly because it takes a lot of trial and error to work out which kicks work with which. And sound selection is the most important thing when it comes to layering. And some samples just aren't going to work. So don't get disappointed when you're practicing layering kicks and they just don't sound right, or they don't sound as professional as other kicks. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes trial and error to find out what works and what doesn't. And a good thing to do in practicing is to pick 2 random kicks, just at random, just pick them from your sample libraries and try to lay them together. And if they don't work, figure out why. If they do work, figure out why. So it's just about asking yourself and analyzing what you did, what went wrong, and so on. So that's layering kicks. In the next video, we're going to be looking at how to layer claps and snares, and all that kind of stuff. So I'll see you then.